Hey everybody, Marshall here to share some really cool news with you. I trust at this point you've all heard about fake yeast. This is that Norwegian ale strain that can ferment cleanly at temperatures as high as, no joke, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 38 degrees Celsius. Absolutely crazy stuff. Well, last year, Imperial Yeast dropped A43 Loki, their Kvake strain, as a seasonal release, which meant we all had a pretty small window to get our hands on some. Not anymore. Imperial Yeast recently announced they're making A43 Loki a year-round strain due to popular demand. They're excited about it. I'm super excited about it. I've had some amazing beers fermented with Loki at terrifyingly warm temperatures. It is amazing stuff. Go grab some A43 Loki and see what all the fuss is about for yourself. Up until about, 5 or 6 years ago, brewers typically prided themselves on their ability to produce a beer with brilliant clarity. Sure, there were definitely some people who flaunted the fact that their hazier beer was, quote, living or unfiltered, but at least in my experience, those were never really, beers to write home about. Even highly hopped beers like Russian River's famous Pliny the Elder Double IPA was clear enough to read through. But then something shifted. Brewers started releasing beers that were more than just a bit hazy, but completely opaque, looking more like a glass of juice or orange-tinted milk than beer, about which people formed some pretty strong opinions. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me in this Brews Views episode to discuss our unabashed opinions about the so-called haze craze is contributor Brian Hall.
It's great to be back, Marshall. The haze craze is something that I find so interesting, in part because it allows us to essentially instantly judge a beer without ever having smelled it or tasted it, which is kind of new. I mean, you could probably look at a Miller Lite in a glass or see a Corona glass and not know the difference between the two. But if I show you these cans of orange juice, essentially, that are being dubbed as beer versus something that's crisp and see-through, you probably have an instant opinion on that.
Yeah, the epitome of judging a book by its cover in the world of beer, for sure. Well, I'm really excited to have you as the co-host on this episode, Brian, because I truly believe, and I wonder how you're going to take this, but I truly believe that you helped to really expose this hazy style New England IPA to the masses a few years ago, along with some other folks that we're going to talk about in a bit. I definitely had some opinions about the whole hazy IPA thing, and while most have evolved over the last few years, I do look forward to chatting with you about them. Now, just as a reminder, this is a Brews Views episode where the goal is to be as honest and as real as possible. I don't plan on going back and making too many edits, which means there may be a bit more adult language than usual. Nothing too crazy, but if there's something you happen to be sensitive, or if this is something that you happen to be sensitive to, we just wanted to let you know up front. So, all right, if you enjoy this show and you'd like to make sure it sticks around for a while, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody rad in the brewing world. Coming up later this month, patrons are going to have the opportunity to ask Mary Izette of Fifth Hammer Brewing out of Queens, New York, some questions. Mary's an awesome person who also authored a book Brewlosophy fans would definitely find interesting called Speed Brewing: Techniques and Recipes for Fast Fermenting Beers, Ciders, Meads, and More. Past guests have included folks like Scott Janish, Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, and Chop and Brew's Chip Walton. And all past sessions are available on our private Facebook page for patrons to watch whenever they like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all. We get a little kickback for the referral. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers gorgeous stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brewlosophy when you're checking out to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Ben Sines wrote in with some feedback on our last Brews Views episode, which was the one where we addressed the hate that we occasionally get. And I'm telling you, we are still getting a lot of feedback on that episode. It just continues to flow in. Most of it hugely positive, which is just shocking to me. So we appreciate that. Here's what Ben had to say. I just want to compliment you on your episode about addressing the hate. I'm a father of 2, happily married, and I teach high school English and helm the cross-country and track and field programs at an all-boys Catholic high school. I have a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I've been a home brewer for 2 years, and I really enjoy your episodes that focus on technique and craft. Those are my favorite, he says. But your approach to homebrewing in general is very refreshing. In your addressing of homebrewing writ large, not only are you candid, but you're also aware of the dark underbelly of the hobby. Gentlemen, politely, fuck the haters. I told you my line of work and the demographics of it because I'm intimately associated with the delicate dance of advertising and shit slinging. When you have a good product, people want to buy it. So sell it. Those who lob bags of dew from the sidelines will eternally dwell in the suburbs of happiness. Let them. They are weak men with weaker minds. Aside from the strain of competition, collecting scalps, and the nerd love of training regimens and scholarly articles about the Great Gatsby, in my line of work, I field a lot of complaints. Dissatisfied parents, snubbed colleagues, overbearing administrators, and more. I've realized that if you want to produce a quality product, for me, that's winning championships and teaching boys how to write a paragraph, you have to trust your gut and stand your ground and throw your arms out with full armpit extension in the face of criticism. You've caught the scent of something good. Don't stop.
So that sounds like a pretty good motivational speech right there.
I know. I had to include it because I feel like there's a part of what Ben is saying here that really just kind of resonates with me. And it's not being angry at the people who have expressed negative stuff about what we're doing necessarily, but this idea of you think that just by you saying that's going to stop me, or us. I just don't. It's not going to. And,
yeah, I've gotten to a point where I just kind of ignore all of it in most aspects of life. It's like if someone wants to be negative, and that's their own problem. I try not to let it cloud my world.
Yeah.
And it's with working with anything in brewlosophy where you get all these comments. It's anything political online. It's any of that sort of stuff. It's like, you'll let it get to you if you want it to, but let them sit there and boil away at it. I don't really care.
It's interesting because the hate has taken many forms over the last few years, and recently, I'll go and somebody will forward me usually a screenshot of something that they saw online where they're making accusations about us or saying that and it's just I'm looking at this going, this is beer. What the hell do you care about, to try to throw us under the bus for something that is literally not going to harm you? I mean, it's unless you overdo it, of course, but it just blows my mind. And
you get all the fun emails. I just keep getting, hey, what's wrong with my New England IPA? What can I get more hop character? Which is fine. I don't get me wrong. I love talking about the beer, but it's kind of like every email is, I'm trying to get a little more hop character in my New England IPAs. Can you please help me out? Can you look at this recipe?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny to hear because I don't ever see hardly any of that unless you forward it on to me. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm the one receiving all of the feedback emails now, so that's where this kind of stuff comes through. But Ben, if you're listening, really thank you for this email. I appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's been writing in support of this. Again, I said it before, but our intention with the whole Brews Views series is just to have a little bit of fun, kind of going off the rails, not really sticking to a specific, brewing topic. And that one really seemed to, we got a lot of new supporters. I'll tell you that from that episode. And that wasn't even the intention, but we do appreciate it. Ben, you clearly get it, and your lack of cynicism is very refreshing. So I have a feeling your students are in good hands. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or you can drop us a line on social media. This episode may be focused on Hazy IPA, but that doesn't mean there aren't still some folks out there making clear versions, like Batch Brewing out of Sydney, Australia. You've heard his name before. My friend Paul Nicodem, who lives in Sydney, recently came through town on his way to hike the John Muir Trail, and he brought me a bunch of beers I can't get here, including Batch Brewing's West Coast IPA.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. I love you guys.
Ooh. Every review with you starts with, ooh.
It's IPA.
You don't know that.
I do.
Yeah, it is. Dude, we're so learned.
God.
You just don't like IPAs.
I just don't like this.
Let me taste
IPA,
it.
that's for sure. Jersey, I tell you right now, you will not like this.
You know that how stubborn I am. You don't have to like it. Say I like it just because I won't be told what to do. It smells delicious.
It does smell delicious. It tastes like household cleaner.
Okay, I'm not gonna disagree with you. I'm not gonna disagree. But hang on a second.
Oh God, I can't even have another sip.
I'm not learned enough to explain this. Starts great. There's something completely void in the middle, and then there's the finish that I can deal with. But there's just something empty and missing.
I
in the
am
middle.
liking
the flavor. It's missing the flavor that would go in the middle of this description. It's like you start
the first
tasting
sip is like bam.
Yep, and you're like, here it comes. There's nothing there, and then there's a finish that I don't like. But I get it.
After it sits, I'm done. I already drank it, and the mouthfeel afterwards, I don't mind that taste, but it's like there's a wall.
Did you say mouthfeel? This is you trying to be learned.
Like right now, after I have not had a sip in 5 seconds, it doesn't taste too bad.
Mouthfeel, you turncoat Benedict Arnold. Oh, it smells great.
I don't like this.
I get it, and I don't hate it. It is missing. It's missing the core of it is gone. There's no core. It's got a start and a finish, but there's nothing there.
Yeah.
It's empty, like my soul.
I'm 0.
I gave it 3 jerseys, and may God have mercy on its soul.
The aroma of this beer took me back to the earlier days. It smelled like 2008 to me, piney, citrusy, clean malt character. Based on what I was, based on that, I was really excited to drink it. And while I did kind of enjoy the beer, I have to agree with the guys. The flavor just seemed to be lacking something, but the smell made up for it. I mean, this was not a bad beer at all. Brian, have you ever experienced that in a beer where it just smells phenomenal and then you drink it and it just there's like something not there. Your expectations aren't met.
Usually it's like a lack of malt character, I would say. Usually it's something where the beer just tastes too thin to me. And I'm not sure if that's without tasting it, there's no real way of knowing. But, usually I've mentioned it before. I kind of like a little bit of, not caramely, but a little extra malt presence in my IPAs just to kind of balance that out. And oftentimes if that's missing, something will taste off to me. The only other times I can think of where something tastes off is when it's with water.
Yeah. Yeah. That was where my brain went was to potential water chemistry issue. It just kind of had a paladness to it. It wasn't bad. I mean, it was refreshing, not much flavor. But it was, batch brewing is we had my wife and I, Laura, went out to Australia and New Zealand a couple years ago and had the opportunity because Paul actually took us to batch brewing, and they're doing great things over in Sydney. And so a part of me also wondered if it wasn't just the fact that this beer was sitting on an airplane for a while and got shipped over here and brought over here by Paul and dropped off at my place. And but regardless, they're doing great things.
Agitated too much, if you will.
Yeah, right. But they're doing good things, and I do appreciate Paul for sharing so many great beers with us. If you have a beer that you would like Jersey and Tim to review here on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. We've got to give some love to our sponsors. When we come back, our opinions on the haze craze. This episode is brought to you by Milwaukee-based Spike Brewing, designer and manufacturer of premium quality homebrewing equipment. Whether you're interested in upgrading to a stainless steel fermenter like the incredible Flex Plus or switching to a turnkey electric setup so you can brew inside and avoid the cold, wet winter, Spike Brewing has the solution for you. Visit spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy today and let their team help you figure out what you need to make the most of your brew day. Again, that's spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy. Spike Brewing. Pursue what's possible. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I honestly don't know how long what we view as New England IPA has actually been around. I have to believe that people were brewing styles that resembled the creamy-looking beer that's so popular today prior to it becoming really popular. But to my recollection, it really only became a known thing, 5-6 years ago. And as a resident of the West Coast, the first commercial examples that I was aware of that had this type of haze the first one was the Alchemist Heady Topper, which is a double IPA, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know where the lines are drawn. I don't think it's labeled as a double IPA. I think it would be in that zone. I offhand, I think it's 6.5 or 7%. Somebody's probably going to correct me on that later. But when I spoke with John Kimmick prior to doing my talk about New England IPAs a couple years ago, he said that it was originally him working with Greg Noonan at the Vermont Pub and Brewery, and Greg Noonan goes back, I want to say, to like the mid 90s, saying that he's been doing beers that are hazier. Now, I don't think that necessarily, in my mind, I haven't, I wasn't drinking during that time, or I wasn't drinking New England IPAs. And I think at that point, it's like, I think a lot of people were leaving kind of a dry hop haze and not really worrying about it too much. And so John Kimmick kind of comes in and he starts up, the Alchemist, and Heady Topper is kind of the first big one to hit the market. And people just went crazy for that. I remember living in Maine. I think it was in 2012. My wife got somebody to bring over 2 cases of Heady Topper, and I got to drink those over the course of a couple months. And that was kind of my first introduction. And then after that, other ones started popping up. There was Hill Farmstead, Trillium, Treehouse, and now we've got Bissell Brothers, Tired Hands, Fiddlehead, so on and so forth. And most of these styles kind of follow the heady, I would say most of these styles kind of follow the heady profile of being, more restrained bitterness, that kind of that juicy flavor that you're going for. And they all probably fit into that double IPA alcohol level, but not so much with the bitterness level that you would expect from, say, a West Coast IPA.
Yeah.
Heady Topper kind of started out as being, it was hazy. If you let it sit for a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, it would be less hazy. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't opaque. It was something that if you had it on a shallow glass, you could see the shadows of your fingers through it. But as the style has progressed, just like with all things brewing, kind of in the battle of let's see how many IBUs we can get into this beer. We've also kind of experienced or visually seen, people have tried to see how murky they can make their beers, which is a adjective that I hate to see beside beers. But I actually did see a beer 2 weeks ago. I think I sent you a picture of it. It was blah 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 double IPA, or it was the name of the brewery, the name of the beer, and then it said murky IPA at the bottom.
Oh my god!
And that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a large part of why this style got a bunch of controversy. To speak historically for a minute here, I had my very first what I would refer to as a hazy IPA, which I believe Scott is preferring over New England IPA nowadays. Maybe not, or at least he uses them interchangeably. I don't care. I don't say it as a pejorative thing, But I had my first one. I'm almost certain it was right around Christmas of 2012, and it was the Alchemist's Heady Topper. Maybe it was 2013. My brother, who is living in Buffalo, New York at the time, or somewhere around there, upstate New York, somehow got his hands on some and sent me a can. And up until then, I'd been drinking Union Jack and Double Jack and Pliny the Elder when I could get my hands on it, and all of that. And so this was the first, I opened up this can of Heady Topper, and I believe somewhere on the can, it even says, John made sure that they had it on there. It says something like drink from the can, right? And my understanding is he said that specifically because he didn't want people thinking that there was something effed up with this beer based on the fact that it was, particularly at the time, way hazier than what else you were going to find, from most commercial breweries putting out these double IPAs and IPAs in general. And back then I drank it from the can because it said to, and I also poured some out because I had to see what it looked like. And sure enough, it was murky. It was pretty doggone hazy. But I enjoyed the beer just fine. I did not realize at the time that. I don't know if John refers to John Kimmich, we're talking about here from The Alchemist, if he refers to Heady Topper as being, a New England IPA, or if he accepts that he kind of is the one who maybe put the style on the map for others to do stuff with or not. But I did not think that it was going to get to the point that it has today.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, when chatting with him, he said, a lot of breweries saw that it was slightly hazy, and so they kind of tried to capitalize on the idea of this hazy IPA, and seeing the popularity of Heady Topper, try to do that as well.
Right.
But he specifically says haze is not the goal, simply a byproduct of the beer making process.
Yeah.
Which we'll probably talk about here in a minute. But to go back on one thing you said, I I heard that more, what you said about the drink from the can because of the visual thing. I heard that as more of kind of a rumor. What I had heard is that there was concern that if you poured the beer out, some of those hop aromas were going to be released into the air, whereas if you just popped the can and drink it, you're getting everything because there's no agitation that would cause any hop aroma to go away. So you're keeping it all contained within the can is the reason that I had heard.
Yeah, I'd never heard that. So that's interesting. I guess it makes sense again from a kind of a practical perspective. But okay, so this style starts to get kind of big, and I'm going to be honest with you. I mentioned it before, and I'm going to drop some other names here, all friends of Brewlosophy. Ed Coffey, Michael Tonsmeyer, Scott Janish, and you, Brian, are the four that when I thought back in the day, when I would think about hazy IPA or these hazier versions of IPA that were coming primarily out of the New England area, the East Coast, those were the names that I associated with. Again, you being one of them, with people who are experimenting with the style, people who are trying to kind of give it a name and really try to make it something that could stand on its own outside of other types of IPA.
Yeah, I would say that in the homebrew world, I don't know. I think I kind of rode on the coattails of Ed Coffey because he started doing New England IPA a little bit before I did, when he was going through all of his iterations of the Tired Hands Hop Hands.
Yeah, right.
And it was chatting with him. Ed and I used to chat all the time. And then he became a professional brewer.
Yeah.
But
there he goes. Another one bites the dust.
But we used to chat about all sorts of things. So I kind of went off of a lot of things that Ed was doing at the time. And then, I kind of met up with you and through the yeast-based stuff. And then that's when I started that's when I first made it into the internet world of beer. And then just started the blog and sharing ideas and the Reddits and the other forums and that sort of thing. And that, and so I think, anytime you publish something, you're opening it up for everybody to see. So I appreciate some of the credit. I don't know if I would put myself up there with some of those other guys, but, I've always tried to be as transparent as possible through my New England IPA process. And I think at this point, I probably made 30 or 40 batches of it. So I've gone through a lot of different things and kind of seen what sorts of things I like.
Yeah.
And I agree. I would have to say I agree with John, as I think of the haze as a byproduct of the technique, so not the goal with my personal thing. And I've always kind of tried to share that from day one, is that, I'm just making these beers because I like the restrained, I like both, but I like the restrained bitterness and the huge hop flavors and aromas. But it's not, haze is something that I've never been like, check out this picture, see how hazy this beer is, sort of thing.
Well, okay, so that brings me to my first kind of tiff that I've had with this style. When it first started to gain popularity, I'm going to be as honest as possible, and I admit that I've changed my opinions on this a bit, but it seemed like the quintessential component. And if you just go back 2 years and listen to some episodes of the Brewlosophy podcast from then, you will hear me say this. But it seemed like the one thing that delineated a New England IPA from all other forms of IPA was the way it looked. That's what people started focusing on. And I on that level, I could understand. Ultimately, again, this is just beer. I don't give two shits about what people want to do or drink. But, in this world, I can understand why some people were like, what the hell are these guys doing? Just making beer to look different. Almost felt like there was this attempt to distinguish themselves, and I'm not talking specifically about, The Alchemist or any Treehouse or any of these other breweries. It seemed like there was this move to try to say, hey, look, we're different. We're doing things different. And a part of that, and a part of what sort of annoyed me, which is weird because we buck convention so much here at Brewlosophy, a part of what annoyed me was it was almost like them trying to prove like, that we're going to take this living unfiltered ale thing, and we're going to take it to an extreme. We're going to go and we're going to prove to people that you can have a beer that tastes good and that people like, that looks like shit, basically. And in the beginning,
it looks like shit to you.
Well, no. Okay, you at least have to agree with me on some level that yes, people have adapted to what New England IPA is, and I think a good part of it is because of people like you saying no, that the haze is a function of the process. It's not intended to be there. But in the beginning, it looked like it was just a fun little, gimmick. And to me, yeah, you're right. Maybe some people think Hazy IPA is beautiful back then too. I don't know. I certainly didn't. And to me, if it was a gimmick, which is what in the beginning, I'll admit, I sort of felt like it was, it just seems so stupid to me. And that was kind of where I began my, and again, I was friends with you and Ed and Mike and all of these guys as well. So it's not like I was dissing anyone, but I could understand that argument against it.
See, I thought originally, some of my thoughts were like, man, all these West Coast people are just so bitter because this other thing's so much more popular.
Except it wasn't. I mean, it is now maybe, but it wasn't.
Well,
then.
It was. I mean, Heady Topper from the get-go was being sought nationally. I mean, it was with the flip of a switch.
Yeah, it did seem like it happened quickly. And I remember I forget what of the millions of beer ranking websites had Pliny the Elder at the top. Maybe it was Paste or something, but they had Pliny the Elder at the top for years and years and years. And I remember when Heady Topper took it over,
Right.
Like that was a big deal out here on the West Coast. So
my thought with the haze progression of things, and this is just, from everything that I've read and everybody I've talked to, is you've got Heady Topper coming out, and this beer is slightly hazy, and it's not something that most people have seen in their IPA. Side note: nobody gives a shit whether Hefeweizen is hazy or not.
Which is kind of a funny thing. Yeah, I agree.
Everybody's totally fine with that.
Yeah.
So you've got this beer coming out that is slightly hazy. It's not the norm, and it's really good. I have yet to meet somebody that, unless they're being a little bitch about, it's a hazy thing, that has had it and said it's bad. Unless they look at it and go, it's hazy, I'm not going to like it.
I will get into my opinions on that, but in a bit. But I will say this: I agree with you in that the beers, the good examples of it. I've had some gnarly, nasty examples, but that goes for any beer for the most part.
Yeah, you got this beer that comes out that's slightly hazy, that is good, and it's selling out fast. There's insane lines for it. The other breweries that jump on are having the same experience. They're doing these releases and they're selling everything, and there's lines around the block. People are lining up hours ahead of time, and so it's gaining in popularity. Well, what everybody sees is the visual component. People are posting pictures of all of their beers, and they are hazy. So, and I think a lot of breweries, rather than thinking, okay, so what is it about this? Is it the restrained bitterness? Is it the water profile? Is it anything else? What they're seeing is a beer that looks different. And so what they're thinking is, all right, how can we get our beer to be hazy so that people will want to have it too? And it was the turning point at which things started to go downhill, because you said you thought the only difference is that there's the haze versus the not haze. And I would take the other stance and say that the original, and a lot of the ones that are actually out there today, there's a couple different things, and it's the restrained bitterness, it's large dry hop, a punch in the face like no other sort of thing, and that creamier mouthfeel from having a different water profile.
Yeah. Nowadays, don't get me wrong, I'm with you on that. You've convinced me, you and Ed and Mike and all those guys.
I'm not saying nowadays. I'm saying that's how it started out, and it has devolved at this point into, or I don't want to say devolve, because some of them aren't bad, even though they might look not like the crystal clear beers that some people like to drink. But there are, just like in pretty much any style you look at, if you look at all of them, there's a lot of crap. But if you show me a crappy looking clear beer, it's hard for me to differentiate that from a really good looking clear beer. If I show you a light bronze New England IPA, and then I show you a purple one that looks like sludge, you can probably make a guesstimate as to, okay, that's being fair to everybody. I have had some of these fruited milkshake New England IPAs that look like, they do look like a milkshake, that are not terrible.
Yeah, I will. I have a local buddy who makes a lot of these. I don't know if he refers to them as milkshake IPAs necessarily, but certainly adjunct-lated New England IPAs.
Yeah, well, I'm talking lactose and fruit and that sort of thing, where the intention is to make it taste like a milkshake.
Do you remember back in the earlier days, which wasn't that long ago, but in the earlier days of New England IPA being a thing, that people would refer to it as milkshake IPA just because it had the look, and then all of a sudden that took on like a life of its own and meant that you were throwing in lactose and fruit and whatnot?
Yeah, I think there was I mean, like with it, when anything new comes out, there's a lot of attempts at defining what it is. And so I think, you had somebody like Tired Hands who early on were making lactose fruit pureed New England IPAs. And so they were actually making New England IPAs. But then, if you see a picture of theirs and you see a picture of somebody else's, unless you taste them, they look the same. So, then the name gets dropped on everybody.
Okay, so you're the only person that I've talked to. I'm sure you're not the only one out there, but you are you and I are close enough that we talk often enough. You're the only person I know who has made a New England IPA that came out crystal clear and still were comfortable calling it a New England IPA.
And maybe that was a mistake because that was pretty early on. But I did use the crisp Clear Choice malt, which is a low polyphenol malt. And a lot of people, if you look at what causes the haze, a lot of people think that it is a higher amount of proteins from the oats that go into it and a higher amount of polyphenols because people are hopping during fermentation, and you have a higher protein content during fermentation. The interaction between these two causes a higher amount of permanent haze. So if you reduce those polyphenols, by having a low polyphenol malt, you can get a clearer beer. And I did make a beer. I would say it's more on the Sip of Sunshine side of the world than I would say on the Hop Hands or Julius side of the world.
Yeah.
But it was very, it was a restrained bitterness. It was a very hoppy flavor. Like I've mentioned in almost every haze conversation we have, I do like a little bit extra malt flavor in my New England IPAs than some of the ones that almost every other one that you'd see, akin to kind of like the Sip of Sunshine sort of flavor profile. But yeah, the beer came out very clear. I would call it, I don't know if I would say it was juicy just from the hops that I had used. And, granted, I think we're going back like 4 years ago. So this was a while ago. I'm trying to remember all this. But yeah, it was very clear. I used the crisp Clear Choice. And then I think this was before I'd played around doing the full biotransformation. So maybe, there was reduced potential to create haze there. But it was a very good beer. But I can't really tell you much about it because I don't know, it was 4 years ago.
Yeah. Well, but the reason I bring it up though is because this idea that I had, and on some level, I'm not going to lie. I do still kind of hold on to this a little bit that a defining characteristic of New England IPA, of Hazy IPA, is its haze. And so I can understand, I guess, on some level, the motivation for people who are making this style to do even stuff they don't need to do, adding weird adjuncts and whatnot to try to keep it hazy. At the same time, that's a part of what contributes to just, nowadays I would just refer to it as kind of a confused perspective on the whole thing. But I will say this, there is a distinct difference between well-made versions of either New England or West Coast, whatever you want to call clear IPA. And I do feel like it's, I'm to the point now where I'm capable of accepting that this thing is its own style. I'm not, I've never been one to try to talk people out of drinking it or anything like that. But there are certain characteristics that I find tend to be pretty consistent even from different breweries, between different New England IPAs. I have a question for you regarding the moniker that this style of beer ended up receiving. I think most people are referring to it as New England IPA these days, but I remember, again, years back, some people would call it Northeast IPA. Do you have any idea why it got one stuck and the other one didn't, or where that may have come from?
I have no idea as to New England versus Northeast.
So I believe Ed was one of the people who was calling it Northeast IPA, and I don't even remember when I started calling it New England instead. But it both are in reference to a specific area of the United States, of course, the New England East Coast area over there. You were living in Maine at the time of this stuff started. The spark really lit, right? Yeah,
I would say it's tough to know exactly when it went off, but I would say I was there in 2011, and I think that The Alchemist was already putting out Heady Topper by that point. So, I was there during kind of the boom as things really started to get going. I would be comfortable saying that, but it's hard to really tell exactly when when things really took off. I think I started brewing a lot of it in 2013 and 14.
Yeah.
And, as I started to blog about it, it is fun because it's a style. I mean, for a while I was brewing all these sour beers, and when the turnaround time is 6 months to a year, and suddenly I've got a beer that I'm turning around in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
It was just like, why not make more and more and more? And we knew a lot of people that were drinking a lot of it. So it was really fun to do it, get everybody's opinions on it, and try it again.
Yeah. At the very least, I think it must have been a lot of fun to be around that area at the time, that kind of this style kind of really got its start and started to get going. I bet that was a lot of fun, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to New England IPA. I've sort of tried to stay a bit away from my own personal opinions about it, but that's not going to last very long. I'm going to get into it as soon as we return from this short break. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAV experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. I definitely consider myself among those who thought that the Hazy IPA thing would be dead soon after it blew up. I thought it was just a passing fad. Perhaps a few breweries, like the OG ones, like The Alchemist, would keep pushing them out. But, I didn't think it was going to be something that every brewery on the West Coast was going to have 400 examples of. Obviously, I was wrong. That's not the case at all. I think a lot of us were wrong. And to this day, I'm still just not a huge fan. This is the opinion piece. I'm not a huge fan of the style. In fact, I'd probably never pay for a pint of it myself. I don't know to date if I have ever paid for a pint of a Hazy IPA. Now, I'm all for people enjoying what they enjoy, but for some reason, there's certain things about this style that I don't seem to like, and I think a lot of it is what other people love about the style. Before I get into that, usually when I say that, I try to keep my opinions to myself these days, because I don't care to convince anyone else to like what I like or whatever, and I'm not really interested in them trying to convince me to like things that I don't like. But a couple of the more common responses, the first one is, well, you're just biased, right? You don't like it because you have convinced yourself that you're not going to like it, but if you had an open mind, you like it. the truth is we're all biased against things. We're all biased to enjoy things and not like them. I do my best to try to approach things as meaningless as beer styles with as little bias as possible. Preference is preference. It's just subjective. So that's one of the responses that I've gotten from people when I talk about this. Another one is that, oh, you're just not having, the good versions of it, or you're not brewing it the right way, or the people who are sharing it with you aren't doing the right things. I've had all of the big ones. I'm telling you. Sip of Sunshine was probably my favorite of all of the ones I've had. I've had Congress Street from Trillium. I've had 4 or 5 different Treehouse beers. In fact, we just had a couple last weekend that some people were sharing with us. I've had all of the good ones. I'm not saying they're bad beers. I'm sure they're great to a lot of people. They don't please my palate that much. Now, what I don't like about New England IPA, first off, Brian, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on this.
This is just kind of fun to listen to be honest.
I know that's why I saved it. But this is the thing. I'm not judging people who like it, and I feel like that's if Brews views us for anything, it's for us to talk in this sort of manner. I don't care what other people like. In the same way that I don't like Hefeweizen, I just don't like that banana clovey thing in my beer. I don't want that. Will I drink it if somebody serves it to me? You bet your ass I will. In the same way that if somebody makes a good New England IPA, I've had some from you and from Malcolm and from other people that are good. They're great. Would I buy it? Would I spend $6 on a pint of it at a pub? Probably not. I'll pick something else out. But I'm not saying they're bad. It's not something that I'm going to seek out. There is something that I get in New England IPA, and I don't know if it's a single thing that's causing it, a single part of the process, or if it's the amalgamation of a few different things. But there's something mid palate that I get in New England IPA that I don't really know how to put my finger on. But it's like this kind of almost warm, sweet thing, mid palate that I get when I drink a New England IPA. Again, I don't know if it's maybe that's what other people describe as creamy mouthfeel, or as, like I've heard you use the term pillowy. And maybe that's just what it is. It's that lacking crispness or whatever, but there's something about it that I find kind of unappealing.
Wow. A lot to digest there.
You're welcome, Brian.
But I feel like I think, boy, I'm afraid to call a psychologist out on this one, but I do think I think you do have a bias against some of these hazy beers.
But here's the deal. And I could see, hold on. Before you go on. No, Dr. Phil, hear me out. Before you go on, but then I could argue that you're right. And maybe I do, but I was never a hater of the style, I feel like because this style received a lot of hate from people in the beer community, that anyone who just has a natural disliking of it, I'm not out ordering a bunch of IPA either, right. West Coast IPA, but there's a bias against people like me who just don't happen to like the style that much as well, right. And I feel like the argument goes both ways is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I see that. If I always, whenever we talk about this, I love to go back and look at one of your first experiences brewing a New England IPA.
I know. I knew you were going to bring this up.
Yeah.
I was shocked by my ability to bake one. I'll be honest with you.
And you said you loved it. You said it was just the most amazing thing. You said it was one of the best IPAs you'd ever made.
Well, yeah, and I think I've made like 8 in my day. I don't brew IPA.
I'm just saying there was a part deep inside of you that liked it. And
well, there was a part of me that was speaking in relative terms is what it is. I was speaking relative to other IPAs I'd made.
I think like a lot of people, and to be honest, it's happening to me as well, but you've had enough bad examples of the style because of what's new and so hypey, and everybody's saying, try this, and everybody's making it. There's a lot of different examples for everybody to taste. And I think when you have so many different beers that you're trying, a lot of them are going to suck, especially as breweries try to figure out how to make their own version of this new style and have it looking the way they want it to look, but tasting good as well. Because a lot of people were throwing flour in, which actually makes your beer clearer. They were throwing apple puree in. They were trying to do all these sorts of things to get a permanent haze in their beer without really thinking about anything else. So I think a lot of people, especially, as these earlier beers were coming out, tried a lot of them that did suck. And so they kind of had like this mental, at least, and this guy could just be totally blowing smoke here. But I see it happening to me where I see these hazy beers and I think, what are the odds that this isn't going to have a pithy, chalky taste to it? Because a lot of them have that to it. And I only mention it with relation to what you're talking about simply because I see it happening to me, and I hate to say it, but I'm starting to burn out on it, the style, at least commercially, because of all of the, I meet up with guys and I do a lot of beer swapping and trading myself, but, guys that are getting in shipments of these things every week, and we get together and we try all of them. And there's a lot of them that are just not great. But everybody wants to be on the haze bandwagon. I mean, you're seeing all these IPAs labeled as hazy IPAs now. You don't have to tell us it's hazy. We get that as soon as we pour it out or whatever. I don't say pour it out down the drain, although that is often the case. But everybody wants to be on the bandwagon. So you're getting more and more examples, because everybody wants to be on that hype train as quick as possible. So we're getting tastes of a lot of beers that aren't as good as some of the OGs from 5 and 7 years ago. So I think a lot of people kind of have a lot of bad beer ingrained in their mind. So when they do see that, and we mentioned it being a very visual thing, when you do see that, you think, another one of these. Whereas if you serve me a pint of clear beer and just say, hey, it's an IPA from so-and-so, I have no idea what I'm getting into. I go into it with a potentially a more open mind, and I'm sure the psychologist in you is probably going to shoot down half those arguments, but that's just what I think is probably happening, because I see it at least I think I see it happening to myself.
No, I'm not going to shoot anything down because they're your opinions, and that's perfectly fine. I will say this, though, that one of the things that to an annoying extent, ask anybody who knows me, that I value about being a human being is the ability to adapt and to change our minds and to not be dogmatically attached to a certain idea. The other thing that I'm absolutely certain of is that some people just like stuff and then other people don't really like that much. And I again, in the beginning, I was so excited to have my brother send me out what I knew was a hazy IPA, which was the Alchemist Heady Topper. I didn't have any preconceived negative ideas about it. I've never been on the hate bandwagon. I've heard a lot of people who are, and the truth is, and I absolutely understand where you're coming from, that if you have a bunch of examples that taste bad, then even you're kind of conditioning yourself to not even like the good parts of those beers that may be consistent between them that make it a New England IPA. Of the New England IPAs that I have chosen to put into my body, most of them are the ones that people are trading online. They're good examples that are getting high reviews, all of that stuff. I'm not, I have not had terrible experiences with New England IPA in the past because I'm not seeking them out. I'm not making them very often. In fact, I'd probably say the worst New England IPA I ever had was the one that I oxidized for the cold side oxidation experiment. House of Pendragon always has at least 2 or 3 on tap. They all seem to be as good as many of the ones that I've had that are made, by some of the bigger, more known breweries out there. So I don't know if that's exactly it. There is literally, I can pinpoint a certain characteristic that I get. One of them, for example, I honestly think has to do with the higher levels of calcium chloride that a lot of brewers who are making this style use, as opposed to sulfate, which is something, again, if it's conditioning and that conditioning has influenced my preference, hey, call it bias, call it what you want. I still prefer that higher sulfate, crisper, cleaner character that I get from, standard clear American IPA, as opposed to that creamy. I've said it before in the past. I don't know if people can relate, but I get like this weird mouth warm feel from when I drink these hazy IPAs. And it's not terribly different than the experience that I have when I drink other styles of beers, whether it's like a brown ale or a red ale that I made with higher levels of chloride to sulfate.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't say I've ever perceived. I have perceived, there is kind of like a lack of bitterness. The things that I don't like from a taste perspective is kind of that chalky, pithy taste, which I feel it comes out when people try to rush the style, when you talk about drinking a yeast slurry sort of thing.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that get me, is the ones where where they're not really, and I don't know, maybe they are, but it doesn't seem as though they're clinging on to the idea that the haze is the byproduct of making quote normal beer. We're shooting for a haze, and you know, I'll say it again. It's like it's unique because it is such a visual thing. Other than, you know, the different SRM values of beer, if they're all clear, there isn't really another way to evaluate, you know, say a light Pilsner from a Pilsner double IPA, you know, like Ray's brewing. But with the New England IPA, there is some association. I mean, that being said, it's like I do it all the time too. I see one of the sludge bombs and it's like, you know, I feel like, oh, this is going to be disgusting. But at the same time, I have had it where somebody pours, you know, we've had some of those, it's like triple berry smoothie milkshake lactose IPA. And, you know, it's not like what I think of when I think, oh, this is an IPA or this is like a normal beer, but it's not bad. It does kind of just taste like a milkshake, sort of thing. But there's this high visual component of grossness with the murky, you know, anything that settles out quickly, that sort of thing.
I don't care if it's a New England IPA or not. If you serve me a beer and within 2 or 3 minutes I start to see sediment falling to the bottom of that or flecks of something solid in there, I'm going to assume that you don't know what you're doing probably, or that you screwed up. And 2, I'm not going to drink it. I just won't. That sounds arrogant maybe, but I'm not going to spend money on something like that. In part because I love my wife and don't want to blow her up at night. But that does, and this was a big argument in the beginning, and I know you heard this one, was that, you know, New England IPA is just IPA made by lazy brewers, right? I mean, people who don't want to go through and I disagree with that. I'll be upfront. I don't think that's the case. I fully embrace this idea that the haze it comes from the process and not necessarily is the end goal of New England IPA. And a part of what buttresses that again is this my perception of these beers as tasting different than clear West Coast style IPA. Now, just because I don't really like it that much doesn't mean I won't drink it. It doesn't mean that I can't even enjoy one. In fact, we had one from I believe it was a Melbourne, Australia brewery, Filter Brewing, and they just called it Haze, that I thought was absolutely fantastic. The best hazier looking IPA that I'd had. Now, I don't know what their process was. I don't know if they abided by all of the quote unquote rules, you know, of making a New England IPA, but I'm not trying to like throw stones here. But in the same way, just because I don't love it, you know, I don't need to be convinced by the masses that, well, if you only had the right one, or if you only knew what you were doing, or if your palate wasn't so shitty, you know, you would like it. And
that just comes down to just personal preference. Yeah. But I do think there is an association with looking at it and seeing it as being different before people try it, because like I said, it's happening to me now. Yeah.
It's kind of, again, it's the judging a book by the cover type of thing, right? Yeah.
And I think that, you know, we automatically associate some bias to that. And it is, you know, these days it's more of it's less often that it becomes a pleasant surprise when I have it, and more often just kind of like this is fine sort of thing. Because there's just, I don't know. That's a whole other thing. I will say that the only thing that I do dislike about it is how polarized it has made part of the community. Yeah. In the haze haters versus the haze lovers versus the hate of the haze lovers. I don't know if I've seen so much of like the hate of clear beer lovers.
No. And it's stupid, man. And I agree with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, or the haze, you know, the whole haze boy thing. It's like, just, you know, if you love it, if you like drinking a yeast starter, go for it. If you like drinking a slightly clear beer or a slightly hazy beer, go for it. If you want a crystal clear beer, knock yourself out. I'll drink what I want to drink. You drink what you want to drink. Amen. But I mean, you could say that about pretty much anything.
Exactly. And of course, I mean, we are sitting here focusing on this style because there's an element of controversy surrounding it, which is, again, if we're going to talk about something stupid in brewing, oh my God, why the hell do you care what somebody else wants to drink, right? Why do you care?
Or the way somebody else brews.
Or the way somebody else brews. That's exactly what I was going to say is, what is it about? I mean, and we're not going to get into other realms where there seems to be just this dogmatic intensity when it comes to the way people are approaching making certain styles and whatnot. I honestly don't get it. I mean, where is your life so good that you have to find something this insignificant to care about? I mean, it just blows my mind that people give a shit about this stuff. So, but anyways, I will tell you this now, and this is a completely, I will admit 100%, this is a personal thing. I'm not asking anybody to change anything, but the fact that no matter where I live in California, I live in California, or West Coast IPA, really, really held its own for a while. I cannot go into a brewery tap room these days and just order. It used to be that I could go into a tap room and I would drink, 85 to 90% of what's on the list. Nowadays, 50% of most tap lists are different versions of Hazy IPA. And I get it. Like, breweries got to make the beers that are selling because they got to stay in business. But it is a huge bummer for me to show up wherever I'm going. And I talk to a lot of these brewers and they're saying, dude, it's not like I want all those on tap, but that's what sells. That's what brings people in here.
Oh, totally. I mean, the local brewery in town, Anchorage Brewing Company, that is nationally popular for their barley wines and their sours.
Yeah.
And their slogan was where brewing is an art and Brettanomyces is king. You look at their tap list and 7 out of 10 beers are double IPAs.
And some are hazy, right?
And they're all hazy.
There you go.
And 60 to 70% of their sales are distributed New England style IPAs, because that's what's selling right now. I mean, I knew it was going to stick around because they are. I mean, at least they were, and there are a lot of examples of good beers, and the pioneers I felt were good. The pioneer beers were good beers.
Sure.
So I didn't feel like it was going away like a lot of people thought it was. But I didn't think it was going to be. I didn't think I was going to see 50 to 60% of the tap list. And maybe 5 years ago that would have been a pretty exciting thing. But at this point, I don't know. I feel like, I don't want to say I've burnt out on them, but I don't get as excited about them as I used to, I should say. It's funny because I've never really gotten excited about them, but I will say that I was more wont to maybe pay for one, even if just a sample or a taster, back when there was 1 or 2 on tap, as opposed to there being 3 different flights that I could get of different hazy IPAs. There is something about it where it's like, okay, overdoing it a bit, and what are we missing out on? I mean, I think about styles. I don't even know if we want to call it a style at this point, but Brute IPA. I mean, last year that had its, it was in the spotlight there for a minute. And I wondered, okay, it's IPA, it's hoppy. There's some unique things that you do to it. Maybe it'll go the same way that New England IPA did. And to me, first off, Brute IPA seemed almost the response to New England IPA. It was like, it's going to be clear, it's going to be dry, it's going to be crisp, not juicy, but more wine. I mean, all of these things opposite of New England IPA, yet still, under the umbrella of India Pale Ale. Who's making Brute IPA anymore? I haven't seen one on tap anywhere in the last 6 months. Yeah, well, that's because they're gross. So, I mean, I don't know. I have not had a commercial nor a homebrewed example of one that I have made or tried that I have thought, wow, this is good.
Welcome to my world with New England IPA, Brian. I'd just like to introduce you to having preference. I've had a few that I thought were absolutely delicious. I've also had some that were horrendous. I agree with that. But there's a couple local ones here that was what I was ordering, and I never order IPA. So, but back to New England IPA, you can't go anywhere without seeing multiple examples, and it sort of reduces its punch. It reduces the novelty of it. And
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. It's like, it was kind of fun to have like 3 or 4 Pilsners, and or I guess in a normal brewery you'd have an IPA, you'd have a porter, you'd have a stout, you'd have a brown ale, you'd have a Pilsner, and that would be their running lineup. And then it was like, all right, and then occasionally somebody would have a New England IPA, and it's like, oh, this is kind of fun to try. It's a little different, but I think going back to the hate side of it, I will say there is one thing that I intensely dislike, and that is and I understand it to a degree, and I'll explain that in a second, but I don't like the pursuit of trying to make things look as hazy and turbid as possible.
Of course not. Yeah.
But I do, and I think back to when I was reading the book Brewing with Wheat. There's a whole section in there about trying to achieve haze stability. And from a marketing perspective, if you're selling your beer on day 4 versus day 34, you want it to look the same.
Yeah.
And you want it to taste the same. And for the people that drink with their eyes, the visual component is a large part of it. And this was in part with working with one of the breweries that I had when we were out. They were asking me some stuff about New England IPAs, and I was bouncing some ideas off of them, and they were talking about trying to achieve a certain haze level. And I was just like, why are you trying to do that? And it never really clicked until they said the thing about product stability and trying to have it look the same, because people are drinking with their eyes when they do this.
Yeah.
But the idea of trying to make the beer is I understand haze stability, but trying to make it hazier, I don't get.
Well, I do. And again,
explain to me then.
Again, this is my own perspective on it, but from a marketing standpoint, if haze is what's selling, then you want to produce a hazy beer. A brewery who's going to market an IPA that they make as a New England IPA or a hazy IPA or whatever, if you can see through it, and the masses, the consumers are coming in looking for haze because that's what's popular,
right?
You want it to be hazy. I mean, I get that.
I get that. I guess what I'm saying is I don't understand the idea, I understand, like, okay, when people were trying to do the IBU battles, it's like, oh, you're doing 50, I'll do 60. You're doing 70, I'll do 90. But it's like, if you got something that looks like, Crystal Light lemonade, why would I want to try and make mine look like chicken broth? Well, if you got something that looks like chicken broth, why would I want to make mine look like
gravy? Yeah, exactly.
Gravy. If you got gravy, why would I want to try mine look like peanut butter?
Yeah.
And then eventually just taking a shit in a glass.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how they, exactly. I'll leave that alone. But,
it's like that's the part that I want to say infuriates me, but I know I'll never drink it because I see it. But I do think at a certain point, when you get something that's selling like that, that's just, in my mind, gross. It's sad for me to see, and probably as for you with your disappearing tap lines, that this is now where brewers are targeting, as opposed to making something that it would be hypothetically more palatable. Although I can't say I've had a lot of peanut butter beers because it is, looking beers because they just look nasty. Maybe they're delicious. I don't know. But
I do think a lot of brewers these days have come around. They're not just chasing the haze, as it were, but are really trying to brew good examples of New England IPA. House of Pendragon, my local watering hole here, always has a couple of them on tap. And relative to other New England IPAs that I've had, they're killing it. These things sell out like crazy. They're very popular, very hoppy. They've got all of the right stuff in order. I don't think that I'm sure there are still those breweries out there who just want to produce the ugliest looking thing in a glass possible. But for the most part, I trust that the brewers who actually care, and the ones who are getting any attention at the very least, are actually their haze is a function of the process, as opposed to them trying doing these exogenous additions to try to make it look creamier than it is. So
I think we've reverted back to that. I do think there was an initial, right when it was, I think it was shortly after Tired Hands started releasing some of their hazier IPAs, where you were seeing a lot of people that were trying to figure out as quickly as possible how to get the most haze as quickly as possible. And that's what they stuck with, and it sold because it looked like it. And this is, I could just be making all of this more dramatic than it actually is, but that was selling quickly. And then they had to kind of go back and relearn, okay, how do I actually make this a little better? Because now, instead of having just 5 examples of it out there, there's 500 of examples of it out there. So how do you make your beer be better again?
Yeah. Well, and that's, so it goes, right? That's the way that this is going to have to go. And that's how, I'm sure, with all new styles, they go through this kind of growth phase and whatnot. The thing about New England IPA that bothers me the most is how incredibly sensitive it is to, seemingly sensitive it is to oxidation, as opposed to other styles. We've done a lot of experimentation with this. We can't seem to nail exactly what it is. I know Scott has talked about manganese content of oats, the different hopping rates and all of this kind of stuff, but we just can't seem to nail down exactly what it is about this style that makes it so incredibly sensitive to oxidation. That above all things, but I could drink a fresh New England IPA and be perfectly happy with it. If it has any hint of oxidation, it makes me gag.
Yeah. I know you're going to laugh at me again for this. I haven't had any huge oxidation issues on a personal level. So I haven't seen the extreme sensitivity. I will say the sensitivity that I've noticed is in the aroma punch from the beer, and that fading rapidly and seeming to be decreased in beers that have been transported across the country, or mailed around in beer trades and whatnot. Because I've had some of these in New England on draft, and then I've had some that have been mailed to Alaska. And, while it sounds like it takes sled dogs to get here, we're still on the 3-day priority mail. So, we're getting them not not weeks later, but there is definitely, at least in my mind, there's definitely a difference between the local New England IPAs and the ones that get mailed in simply on a level of freshness.
Yeah, I think that matters as well. Freshness is key, right? Yeah.
Right. Freshness. So freshness is key. You know, we talk about these aromas being in parts per billions. They're very, very small. And so when you lose some of that, you're losing a very large aspect of the beer.
Yeah. All right, real quick, before we end this thing, I would like to go over kind of from start to finish, but in a really, really brief way, some things that one might want to consider, at the very least, when trying to brew their own New England IPA. And I'm going to start with the first one, because water is usually the first thing you're collecting. It seems very typical to use a higher chloride to sulfate ratio. On the scale of maybe 2 to 1, about. I've done that before, about 200 ppm chloride to about 100 ppm or less of sulfate. Brian, do you have any thoughts on the water profile for brewing a New England IPA?
Yeah, I'm going to make this as brief as possible. What I'm going to say is don't go above 200 parts on the chloride and stick with about a 1.5 to 1 ratio.
Okay. So you would say about 150 to 100.
I'm going to dictate this like it's the word of the Lord here, but really these are just my opinions. I'll just say that out now before I have to say that before everything else that I'm about to say. But yeah, I would go 1.5 to 1, and don't go higher than 200. Otherwise, you're going to start to taste it. 150 to 175 is the sweet spot for me.
Perfect. That's great. And then in terms of your grist, the grains that you use, my understanding is that flaked adjunct is usually a fairly considerable portion of the grist for a lot of people, upwards of 15 to 30%. And I know that oats seem to get a lot of attention when it comes to New England IPA. At the same time, you've used different types of wheat, from wheat malt to flaked wheat as well, right, Brian?
Yeah. Usually what you see is 80% base malt and 20% adjunct tends to give you the highest amount of a permanent haze. When you start going into the 30 and 40%, you actually get less haze, is what people in studies have shown. Malted wheat and malted oats or flaked oats seem to be the most popular. My current go-to are malted oats. There's a slight oatier flavor. Oat milk is kind of a cheater's way of getting some oat flavor in quickly, but it does tend to dissipate rather quickly as well.
It falls out quicker is what I've heard. Yeah. So, okay. In thinking about hops, of course, this is a style that is, I think, one of the things that really separates it from, old school American IPA is the fact that it does seem to have a much more restrained bitterness, which would suggest that you're not using too much, at least high alpha hops too early in the boil, reserving larger portions for later on in the boil and for the dry hop.
Yeah, I generally try to target around, I usually do a 15 IBU addition at 60 minutes, and then I will play around with anything else. I usually I've fallen into liking 5-minute and 1-minute additions, and for a 1 minute, I put it in Beersmith as 1 minute, but really I'm putting them in at flame out, and they sit in there until I've completely chilled.
Yeah.
And that will be, I don't know my international units as quickly, but usually I would say 2 to 3 ounces at 5 minutes, and then maybe 4 to 5 ounces for that flame out edition.
So you're looking at about 60 to 80 grams for the 5 minute, and then upwards of maybe 120 grams or so for that.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I tend to use Citra hops as I do a base malt. I have never found anything catty about Citra that has come out to me personally. So I use it as 50% of almost all my hop bills, just so I kind of have a baseline when I experiment with other different hops. And I really like, all the cheater hops. I really have enjoyed Enigma lately, has been kind of one of my favorites. I'm not quite as into the Galaxy. Amarillo is also a pretty solid one. I'm not what am I trying to say? The one with the M.
Mosaic.
I'm not a Mosaic fan. Ray one time mentioned to me something about like this prickly, diesely character he got from it. And the next time I tried an all Mosaic beer, I got that. Although I will say the Mosaic we tried at Hop Harvest one time from Bale Breaker, we were doing that hop selection that smelled like blueberries. I feel like that would be amazing.
Yeah. I get the diesel thing with certain mosaic crops, and it's something that I actually don't dislike. So again, personal preference thing. One of the more interesting things I think about New England IPA is when it comes to fermentation, the yeast selection that people are using, typically going with something of notable English descent, right? Whether that's the Boddington strain, which I believe is imperial yeast juice, or I know people for dry yeast are using the Safale SO4.
Yeah, I've used SO4 once. I've heard mixed reviews of SO4. I used it in Sip of Sunshine clone I did because I think that's what they recommended. But the two big ones you see are the London Ale 3 or the Vermont or the Burlington yeast are kind of the two big ones.
Yeah, which is Boddington. Those are sourced from Boddington's, and the other one is sourced from the Alchemist Heady Topper, which they refer to as Conan. Yeah. So.
Well, yeah. So the Conan one I don't use anymore. If I use juice over any of the ones labeled as a Burlington or a Vermont, that supposedly releases more mango-y flavors, which I've never really picked up on. I've always enjoyed the juice strain.
Yeah, it's good. I've used juice in things other than New England IPA. It's a fantastic strain. The final thing, besides, of course, when you're packaging, you want to try to reduce oxygen exposure as much as possible. But the dry hopping thing, we can't spend too much time on this. You can search for a past episode on biotransformation. But this is a style where the dry hopping, at least the first dry hop dose, typically occurs during high krausen as opposed to towards the tail end of fermentation. And I know in the beginning, one of the arguments was that this would encourage biotransformation of certain terpenes and whatnot into other, flavorful compounds in the beer.
Yeah. Personally, at this point, I just dry hop during the tail end of fermentation. If you want a little extra pick-me-up, you can dry hop in the keg as well, although it's a little more difficult to do a full purge and do that, so I've stopped doing that altogether. I dry hop during the tail end of fermentation. That's good for me. The only thing I will add on to that I have mentioned before is I have found that sometimes less is more, and that if you are adding in a insane dry hop, some people going up to a pound per 5-gallon batch, A, you're wasting hops, and B, you're gonna give your beer some rougher notes around the edges that are going to take longer to kind of round out.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing, regardless of what style of IPA it is. Just don't overdo that dry hop because it can make it more difficult to drink. Well, Brian, I promise you this, my friend, that next time I'm at Pendragon or whatever brew pub, I will order a taster of a New England IPA, and I will think of you. I'll do my best. I probably will enjoy it just fine. I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm man enough to go and order a full pint of it yet, but I will order a taster and I will think of you. Do you have any final thoughts on, or views, I should say, on New England IPA before we hit the road?
I think that's a great idea. It sounds like you've found a brewery that is making good New England IPA. And so the only thing I would encourage people to do is, like, if you're somebody that, like me, has fallen out of love with the style, is take a break and revisit the ones you love. If you're somebody that hates it, that's fine. Just keep your mouth shut. And if you're someone that loves it, that's fine. Keep your mouth shut.
And also, if you are brewing New England IPA, whether on the homebrew scale or the commercial scale, and they are turning purple or brown, you're doing something wrong. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about all of the experimental stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.